My sister-in-law betrothed me to someone. He was a young general who had crawled out of a pile of corpses.
He holds great power and is fiercely loyal in love. He will never fail you.
Blushing with shyness, I agreed. But after we married, and after going through immense pain, I finally realized that he was my sister-in-law's old flame. Back when he was poor, she had dumped him. He forced her to compensate him with a wife, and my sister-in-law, fearing his relentless pestering, and even more terrified of his revenge. This is my husband's younger sister. Her features are delicate and lovely, far surpassing how I used to look. Pushed me into the fiery pit just like that. Reborn to the moment my sister-in-law was writing the marriage contract. I pressed down on her hand and pulled out the keepsake left to me by my late mother. I am already betrothed.
Betrothed.
My sister-in-law froze slightly. She put down her brush, splattering ink across the paper and ruining the red marriage contract.
I've never heard anyone mention this.
I turned my head away, not wanting to look at her. It was an arranged marriage made by my mother years ago before I was born. Betrothed to the unborn child of her best friend. That is why very few people know about this marriage. But she kept her word. Therefore, before I meet that young master again, I cannot marry anyone else. She clutched the silk handkerchief in her hand tightly, flustered and at a loss, tears welling up in her eyes from anxiety.
But I have already promised General Xie. He despises untrustworthy people the most. I fear he will bring his wrath down upon me.
The young general she spoke of was named Xie Yi. He rose from the very bottom, rising through the ranks to become a general and a marquis. Everyone says he is a refined and chivalrous hero, and exceedingly handsome as well, except that he was cold and ruthless, making him extremely difficult to approach. Even after reaching adulthood, he had never betrothed himself to anyone. In my past life, my sister-in-law told me,
I used to know him, and I know what kind of man he is. He will dote on you.
I foolishly believed her, and so I married him. On our wedding night, the bridal rod lifted my red veil. The flickering light of the wedding candles illuminated the man's face. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. His interest clearly piqued.
Oh, so this is what my wife looks like.
At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, mistakenly thinking he approved of my looks. Blushing furiously, I lowered my hands. In the beginning, he treated me exceptionally well, yielding to me in every way. I truly believed it was a match made in heaven. Later, during a visit back to my family home, by a twist of fate, I caught a glimpse of the long-abandoned courtyard, where my sister-in-law was cornered against the wall by him. Weeping with her head bowed, Xie Yi was extremely tall, casting a dark, imposing shadow over her. He leisurely took in her cowardly, terrified state.
I will never allow you to grow old in love with him. Right now, crushing this household and taking back my old love would be effortless. You had better pray that I can grow to like the wife you gave me, so I might lose the desire to torture you.
Meanwhile, she wept miserably, using her sleeve to wipe away her tears.
Regarding the past, I had my own hidden reasons too.
Only then did I finally understand that the two of them shared an unspeakable hidden past. They were originally childhood sweethearts, having grown up together. She once tried to climb the social ladder and treated him like dirt. My eldest brother stole her away, which also made him a target of resentment. As for me, I was merely her compensation to Xie Yi, and the bargaining chip Xie Yi used to threaten my brother. The only time I ever fell in love in my life became a sacrifice in this absurd, toxic romance. I couldn't hide my emotions and shed tears many times, having a huge fight with Xie Yi. Once I dropped all pretenses with him, he stopped acting too. He cast aside his disguise of a gentle nobleman, half opening his cold eyes as he tightly pinched my arm, toyed with it slowly, and said,
It is very difficult for your brother to serve as an official. As for your idea of us sleeping in separate rooms, you had better reconsider.
His words sounded casual, yet they were incredibly despicable. In the years that followed, we were joined in name only, but alienated in heart. Married for 5 years, we hurt each other, suffering as if we had exhausted half our lives. I did not want to bear his child, so I drank sterilizing medicine. I had even raised a knife and stabbed him in the back. Later, when we encountered danger during a hunt, Xie Yi was also exhausted. He took a blade for me, lifted his eyelids slightly, and said with a faint smile on his lips,
When a man is about to die, his words are true. So this time, I say if there is a next life, I would rather not torment her, and I will let you off too. Do you believe me?
I don't believe you. At that time, he forced himself to keep his eyes open. Others couldn't understand his nonsensical words, and mistook us for a deeply loving couple, urging me to accept his promise for the next life. I had no choice but to agree. But in this lifetime, no matter what, I do not want to walk down that old path again. I never made any promise to you, I said, pinching my palm tightly. That is a grudge between you and him. Why drag me into it? I had been raised to be gentle and obedient, and had never challenged my sister-in-law like this before. Her face turned pale, as if her hidden motives had been exposed.
What do you mean by a grudge between me and him? Your mother passed away early, and an elder sister-in-law is like a mother. I am arranging this marriage for you out of goodwill. It is one thing if you aren't grateful, but how can you blame me like this?
As she spoke in anger, her eyes grew red. a beauty in tears, her eyes like autumn ripples. No wonder Xie Yi could never forget her, and my eldest brother was willing to yield to her in every way. Clutching my mother's relic tightly, I still refused to back down. His reputation is terrible, and I don't want to marry him. Besides, my mother arranged a betrothal for me first, since you are familiar with him. If you talk to him patiently, he might not be unable to let it go. My sister-in-law fell silent, her expression as pale as frost. I only realized in the end that as soon as Xie Yi arrived in the capital, he found a way to send a letter to my sister-in-law. In the letter, he threatened her, saying he would torment her and destroy the wealthy life she had painstakingly schemed to obtain. She knew he had an extreme personality, which was why she was so terrified. But actually, there was no need to worry too much. In my past life, while in Xie Yi's study, I saw a portrait of her. The date written on it was March of this year, depicting a girl of 16, with a light fan covering her face. I didn't recognize her at first, and stared at it blankly for a long time. Then, Xie Yi burst into the room, hid the scroll away, and stood over me. He was extremely tall. The moment he looked down at me, he was incredibly arrogant, his expression freezing cold.
Get out.
We had only just married back then, and so completely off guard, I came to realize that he had a white moonlight, an unforgettable first love, that he had a white moonlight in his heart, someone he cherished and protected so much that even a glance from anyone else was an offense. At this point in time, Xie Yi still regarded her as an unfulfilled dream of his youth, an unreachable star. She only needed to bow her head to him, and he would stop. That was the resentment between the two of them, and I had no wish to get involved. I merely sent someone to inquire about the whereabouts of my mother's close friend. Back when she was in Yangzhou, their love and hatred were deeply entangled, but this time, I was going to run far away. Before any news could travel back, I heard that my sister-in-law was arranging a marriage for my cousin. When my older brother heard this, he chuckled slightly.
Since when did you develop a fondness for matchmaking?
My sister-in-law covered her mouth and smiled.
The one who asked me to play matchmaker is a powerful noble. He heard that the daughter of the Shu family is well-educated and sensible, and wishes to form an alliance through marriage. I thought this would be a wonderful match, but unfortunately Yangzhou is already betrothed.
Yet he insists on having a daughter of our Shu family.
My sister-in-law lowered her head and fell silent for a moment, her voice growing very faint, as she murmured with deep meaning. He insists on it. I understood. If he didn't marry a daughter of the Shu family, Xie Yi would have no excuse, under the guise of accompanying his wife to her family home, to have trysts with my sister-in-law. And as for her, she only needed to give Xie Yi a wife. Anyone would do. In the main hall, she held my orphaned cousin's arm and said,
An old friend of mine wishes to marry a young lady from my husband's family. If you marry him, you will be draped in gold and silver, be bestowed with a noble title, and you won't even have to serve any parents-in-law.
My cousin's father had passed away early, and she was currently under my brother's care. At this moment, she was wavering.
For this marriage, why not give it to my older cousin?
My sister-in-law's eyes darkened slightly.
She has far too proud a temper.
I lifted the door curtain and stepped forward, staring straight at her. Because that man has an atrocious temper and already has a white moonlight in his heart, he is by no means a good husband. After saying my piece, I left. But secretly, I bribed a servant with money to slip a note to my cousin. I wrote that he was an utter scoundrel. He would scheme against her and humiliate her. Aside from a superficial show of marriage, she would gain absolutely nothing. But 2 days later, while I was in the corridor, my sister-in-law called out to me from behind.
She has agreed. Shu Yangzhou,
she said, pinching a loose leaf as her tone gradually turned icy cold.
Not everyone is like you, with a privileged background and a young, promising older brother, meaning you don't have to sacrifice your own marriage. General Xi's flaws do not overshadow his merits. She likes him very much.
Those words stung me like a knife. I turned around to look at her. She closed her eyes, her brow furrowed tightly, as if in deep sorrow. She was also speaking of herself. If she had been able to choose back then, she would never have betrayed Xie Yi. He was betrothed to me, outstanding in every way. Yet, he was the elder brother she utterly detested. And now, she could only suffer the torment of a burning heart, watching helplessly as he prepared to marry his new bride. The news of Xie Yi's marriage to the daughter of the Shu family spread throughout the city. We had long since split our household from our relatives. But in this city, the daughter of the Shu family was not limited to just me. The servant who returned to the manor to deliver letters congratulated me, yet was also deeply perplexed.
The second Mrs. Happy occasion is drawing near, so why do we still need to inquire about your past betrothal?
My thoughts drifted, and looking down at my fingers, I said, It is my cousin who is getting married. The servant let out a long sigh of relief.
What a coincidence that Madame Wei happens to have a son who is looking to marry. It could be considered a match made in heaven. The madam also asked me if you had suffered any grievances, miss. If so, relying on your past friendship, regardless of any marriage alliance. She would certainly help you.
I felt a bit like crying and lowered my head. Thank you for delivering the message. In a few days, I will return to my uncle's house in Yangzhou. I will also certainly visit Mrs. Wei in person. I have finalized my departure from the capital. My return date is uncertain. I spent a few days packing my bags. The courtyard was filled with my belongings. My sister-in-law had no time to bother with me because I had talked back to her repeatedly. She did not even want to look at me anymore. Every time we crossed paths, she would brush past me and leave quickly, without the slightest hint of a smile.
I selected several handsome young gentlemen, but she didn't fancy any of them. Perhaps upon returning to Yangzhou, she might just find a good match back in Yangzhou.
My eldest brother was busy with government affairs and disliked meddling in the affairs of the inner courtyard. Believing she was right, he simply let me have my way. Over the past few days, my cousin seemed like a completely different person. She wore a fashionable gauze dress, dripping with jewels, with bright eyes and white teeth, without a single trace of her former self-doubt.
Sister, General Xie might not be as bad as you say. Although he hasn't met with me, he has been extremely good to me, giving me endless amounts of money. I didn't dare to just take it, but he said as long as I'm willing to accept it, he is willing to buy me anything. Perhaps we really are a perfect match.
The sunlight filtered through the tree canopy and onto the ground, reflecting her vibrant and arrogant smile. Hearing this, I felt utterly confused. In our past life, he had also treated me exceptionally well. I was filled with anticipation, believing that my husband and I would love each other deeply and grow old together. What a pity that all those dreams were shattered. Just as I was about to reply, a servant came to report that General Xie had come to visit. My sister-in-law cast her eyes down, only daring to look at the plants in the courtyard. She raised her arm to brush away her stray hair, covering her burning earlobes. She was far from calm inside. He had visited dozens of times before, under the pretext of seeing me, just to catch another glimpse of his former love. He claims to seek revenge, but in truth, he has never let go. But this time,
The general says he is here to see his bride-to-be, the young lady of the Shu family. He also hopes the young mistress can clear the main hall, so they may have absolute quiet, without any interruptions from others.
he did not come to see her. My sister-in-law's face turned deathly pale. Her expression went dead for a moment. She tactfully declined.
Our Shu family is considered a prestigious clan. How could there be a rule allowing an engaged couple to meet so blatantly in private?
My cousin stared at her, wanting to speak but stopping herself. Concerned about her own reputation, she ultimately said nothing. The servant returned to report again. I waited for a short while, hearing from the servant that she had left. I called someone to help me carry my luggage, planning to set off for Yangzhou. The maids nearby were gossiping secretly, with a hint of envy in their voices.
General Xie is indeed extremely good to the second young lady.
He rushed over so quickly. When he heard from the young mistress that they couldn't meet, he merely smiled and said, "Then we shall not meet."
He is good to her and respects her. Such a gentleman is rare in this world. The second young lady is truly blessed.
He was merely acting so perfectly that it made everyone believe it without a doubt. Hearing this made me extremely irritated. Shut up, all of you.
Yes, miss.
The chatter stopped for a moment and faded away.
Second young lady.
I took a boat journey south, riding the wind and breaking the waves, arriving in Yangzhou in about 10 days. It was the third lunar month of spring, with a gentle breeze and fine drizzle. My aunt had prepared the room where my mother used to sleep. Once I was settled in, I rested and recuperated carefully for a few days. However, with so much on my mind, I was constantly unable to sleep through the night. I hesitated for a long time, spent half the night writing a letter, and then crumpled the paper in my hand. In my past life, I had once burst into my eldest brother's private room and told him everything about my sister-in-law's affair with Xie Yi, leaving out no details. When he heard Xie Yi's name, he was stunned for a long time.
So it is him. That is an old debt from the past. If you want to divorce your husband, I will help you even if I lose my official post. But as for her,
His temper was so mild that he seemed like a coward.
Yun Chao, I understand everything now. She had a former lover. This marriage can be considered as something I forced upon her.
I smashed the items in his study, including several priceless Duan inkstones and rare out-of-print books, throwing them all until nothing was left. My entire body felt as if my bones had dissolved, and I nearly collapsed to the floor from the chair. I gritted my teeth, forcing back my tears and crying out, "You are so spineless." Just yesterday I saw Xie Yi, in order to please her, shove a gold hairpin worth 10,000 taels into her hands. She even said she deeply regretted walking away back then. My brother held his head, turning his face away, unwilling to look at me, only letting out a heavy sigh. After a dead silence, he uttered only one sentence.
You should separate from him.
He spoke not a single word about himself. And then I understood. Life and death are decreed by fate. He was meant to wear himself out with those two, even if he would end up utterly devastated in the end, and I only needed to look after myself. My heart was also filled with anger, pitying his misery, hating his spinelessness. Whether I told him or not made no difference. It would do nothing but add to his immense grief. In an instant, I abandoned the idea of telling him. Discarding the crumpled letter, I erased all those painful memories completely from my mind. Anyway, in this lifetime, I will never have anything to do with Xie Yi again. How they turn out had absolutely nothing to do with me. Just as early spring brought everything back to life, I dressed myself neatly to fulfill my promise and paid a visit to the Wei residence to see my late mother's close friend. Mrs. Wei was a dignified and elegant lady. She gently stroked my hair, praising how much I resembled my mother.
By generation, I really should be your godmother, but your mother passed away so early, and the contact between our two families was cut off. She held me close and shared many intimate words.
Her tears falling like rain.
To have made your way here, you must have suffered terribly to make it all the way here.
I snuggled into her embrace, my throat tight with emotion, unable to make a sound for a long moment. However, her son was not nearly as approachable as she was. From far away, a clamor of voices could be heard. A maid blocked him at the door.
Young master, the madam is chatting with the young lady of the Shu family.
Chatting.
That voice was clear and bright, carrying a spirited, manly air, yet laced with a hint of irritation.
I've already heard people say that the girl is my fiancée in some story, but I've only just turned 17. Am I to be manipulated by others into marrying a woman I've never even met?
The maid hesitated. Mrs. Wei raised her hand and wiped away her tears and gave me a slightly apologetic smile.
The boy is wild and arrogant. Don't take any of his nonsense to heart.
I shook my head. It is fine. I already knew before coming here. Wei Liang, the young master of the Wei family, is dozens of days younger than me. If my own mother hadn't passed away early, he could also be considered my younger brother. Besides, in my past life, I lived into my 20s, so I was naturally more mature than him and wouldn't get upset over this. Madame Wei waved her hand and ordered the maid to bring him into the room.
Who told you such nonsense? How could I be such an unreasonable mother? If you are unwilling, would I force you to marry? Besides, the second young lady of the Shu family is exceptionally beautiful and famous throughout the capital. Who is to say she would even fancy you?
Wei Liang lowered his head, using the ribs of his folded fan to lift the curtain. Presumably, his mother's words put him at ease. His voice was slow and drawling, his tone slightly arrogant, yet tinged with playful amusement.
Well, that is hard to say.
Madame Wei ignored him.
In any case, she is like an older sister to you. If you don't want to call her your betrothed, then just call her sister Shu.
I looked up, lost in thought, facing the boy with the straight, prominent nose, thin lips as red as vermilion, and fox eyes like a pool of clear water, rippling with waves of emotion. Exquisite looks, the kind of look that made it hard to turn away. No wonder he is a bit arrogant. Our eyes met for a few seconds. Then, he looked away and cleared his throat slightly.
Second, Miss C.
I stood up to greet him, then sat back down. I held my cup and continued chatting with Mrs. Wei. Perhaps because a stranger was present, Wei Liang seemed a bit nervous. He stood up to pour water several times, occasionally spilling tea onto his cuffs, earning a glare from Madame Wei.
So clumsy. Just sit still.
He bit his lip, but he didn't argue, only giving a soft grunt. From that day on, I began to visit the Wei residence frequently. Mrs. Wei's daughter was getting married, so she had too much free time on her hands. She kept dragging me over to chat with her. Once, she mentioned
that Wei Liang had gathered his close friends to practice archery at the training grounds. Do you want to go take a look? Those boys are all young talents of Yangzhou, around your age.
I understood her underlying meaning. Her hospitality was hard to refuse, so I went along. Just as it was Wei Liang's turn to draw his bow, someone called out to him.
Wei Liang, do you have another cousin?
He glanced over and said,
She is not my cousin. She is the daughter of the Shu family. The child of my mother's dear friend.
The wind seemed a bit warm. Wei Liang's forehead broke out in a cold sweat. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, and several arrows he shot missed the bullseye completely. Amidst the good-natured teasing of the crowd, he was laughed out of the game. The young man walked up to me, carrying his bow. I couldn't tell what he was thinking. His dark eyelashes veiled his eyes. After hesitating for a long time, he only said,
Do you want to give it a try? If you don't know how.
I can. I said, sure. I took the bow from his hand, casually drew 2 arrows from the quiver, pulled the bow to a full circle, and released. They pierced straight through the bullseye. I knew archery. While I wasn't a perfect shot every time, I could easily outperform most amateurs. Xie Yi had taught me that in the past. He had countless enemies, and because of him, I was constantly being ambushed. He insisted on teaching me self-defense, acting casual and careless during the lessons, yet his words were always laced with venom.
This is to keep you from dying too quickly, so I won't have to go through the trouble of marrying another wife.
But later on, once I mastered the skills, I would always hide a dagger under my bed. Several times, I wanted to stab him. Once, a few strands of his hair were sliced off. He straightened his back, tightly gripped my arm, and flew into a rage.
Hiding such a lethal weapon by your bedside.
The corner of his mouth mouth twitched, devoid of any warmth, his words vicious and extremely mocking.
Your skills are terrible. If you fail to kill me and end up cutting yourself instead, who are you going to blame then?
He punished me by making me train all night. I turned my back to him, pulled up the blanket, not wanting to understand a single word. After we wasted half the night. After a long standoff, he also grew tired of scolding me.
Tomorrow, you'll practice swordplay instead.
He was so temperamental. He was 5 years older than me and had taught me countless skills. That was probably his only redeeming quality. Wei Liang was stunned, his bright, watery eyes looking at me so softly that it could melt anyone's heart.
You have great skills, second miss.
I fell into thought. I had never been praised for my martial arts before, so I didn't quite know how to respond. I only recalled that he seemed to have missed his targets. Do you need me to guide you? He didn't say a word right away, his fair, delicate face flushing bright red.
I'm not usually like this.
He said, but suddenly paused for a second. Then, lowering his voice, as if carrying a soft temptation, he said,
Yes, Sister Shu, please guide me.
My heart felt as if it had been gently scratched by a kitten's paw, stirring an indescribable flutter inside me. Even my words became a little clumsy. I stayed in Yangzhou for half the summer. My eldest brother still cares about me deeply. He squeezes out whatever time he can to write letters to me. Sometimes he shares his own worries, and sometimes he asks about my situation. Last time you mentioned that you went out with the young master of the Wei family. What is your impression of him? Are we going to have a wedding soon? Your sister-in-law can arrange it for you. The moment he mentioned my sister-in-law, I stopped replying to those letters. As this went on, my brother also noticed something was off and stopped bringing it up. Fine then. If you marry in the future, I will prepare everything for you. Speaking of weddings, my cousin's marriage completely fell through. They had already completed the 6 rites, but got stuck at the matching of their birth charts. It was deemed a mismatch, claiming their fates clashed, and marrying would bring misfortune. This made my cousin cry for days and nights. Countless couples to be get stuck at this stage. I never expected that Commander Xie, who fought on the frontier and dared to risk his life, would actually be superstitious as well. He must have been triggered by my sister-in-law back then, feeling utterly devastated, with nothing left but the urge to kill. When he wrote to this page, his brush strokes grew harsher, the ink exceptionally dark, as if filled with regret. It is a pity he poured out all his passion. If a woman gives her heart, it is hard for her to escape with her life.
You and young Master Wei shouldn't rush into things either. You must observe him for a while longer. With my official rank, it wouldn't be difficult to support you in the manner for the rest of your life.
Eldest brother truly doted on me. Unfortunately, his own romantic entanglements were an endless, tangled mess. Who could possibly understand? I folded the paper, began grinding the ink, and planned out my report. I recalled those final days before leaving the manor. My cousin, her face glowing with joy, had sent countless treasures from Xie Yi to my sister-in-law, even thanking her for finding me a good husband. The gifts were incredibly lavish, including gold hairpins from the imperial city and flowing silks that 10,000 taels of silver couldn't buy. To my cousin back then, this was already nothing unusual. My sister-in-law flatly refused the gift, her fists clenched tightly inside her long sleeves.
These are his gifts to you. How could I possibly accept them?
I suspect she had already harbored resentment by that point. Just a few of her tears would be enough to force Xie Yi to abandon my cousin. During the 2nd year of her marriage, Xie Yi had treated her the same way. When sister-in-law was returning to her maiden home, she encountered bandits on the road. Her coachman slipped out of the mountains to call for reinforcements. He did not look for my eldest brother, nor did he seek out sister-in-law's own clan. He only went to find Xie Yi. The rain was pouring down heavily when he returned from the pitch-black night, protecting the terrified woman in his arms. I wanted to go and call my eldest brother, but Xie Yi, with a blade hanging at his hip, leaned against the threshold, looked down at me, his gaze dark and menacing.
Your brother is nothing but a pedantic scholar. What could he possibly do to me? A clever wife should know when to turn a blind eye. He is good to everyone. If you are unhappy,
He paused for a second.
it doesn't matter at all. Then just divorce your husband.
Regrettably, he did not keep his word after that. In this lifetime, he actually rejected the marriage. I suppose this is a blessing, allowing my poor cousin to escape an endless vortex. She is still young. She will get over it after crying for a few days. It will pass in just a few days. I refuse to recall the pain of the past. Wei Liang has been visiting me these past few days. He and I have definitely become close acquaintances. Madame Wei hasn't mentioned introducing me to other men again. Instead, she has been telling me a lot about him.
My youngest son only looks a bit unreliable, but he has a very kind heart. In terms of scholarship, he studied under a great master, and even the Prime Minister has praised his political essays. As for swordsmanship and archery, his skills are unmatched. He can take an enemy's head from 100 paces away.
She boasted happily, sounding very proud. I was a bit dazed as I listened. In my eyes, he didn't seem to be like this at all. But after thinking about it, it became clear to me again. In an instant, my face flushed and I lowered my head. He really is exceptional. Wei Liang has accompanied me on outings dozens of times, boating on the lotus pond and walking by the weeping willows. He hesitated to speak several times. I even overthought it, mistakenly believing he was about to confess his love. But in the end, he raised his arm and covered his eyes with his wrist, his earlobes turning so red they looked ready to bleed, his voice dry, swallowing all his words back down. On this visit to our manor, he had a grand plan to tell me about.
My mother secured an official post for me. She wants me to follow my uncle to wipe out the pirates, to marry and establish a career. One must establish a career first so as not to wrong my future wife.
The gentle breeze brushed past. The young man stood tall and straight, with a bright smile, his voice rising slightly with excitement, looking heroic and dashing.
When I return to the capital, I have something very important to tell you.
I understood his meaning. Don't wait for a victorious return. I immediately stood up, stepped close to his chest, and looked up at him. Can you tell me now? The young man lost his composure, taking a step back. His back bumped against the doorframe, hitting it quite hard, yet he didn't even flinch, his mind entirely filled with fluster. His voice softened, and his face showed a faint blush under the bright sun.
I am not good enough. I haven't achieved any merits at all, and I idle away my days. Before I met you, I even mentioned that I was unwilling. How can I be worthy of bringing this up now?
I tugged at the corner of his robe, looking up to stare intently at him, my tone gentle. I want to hear it now. His face flushed crimson. Unable to avoid my gaze, he turned back to look at me, taking a deep breath.
All right, I will tell you now.
I had confirmed Wei Liang's feelings for me. When he left, his steps were still light and airy, as if he were walking on cotton, his face so hot it could have vaporized water. I was the same. During dinner, I kept spacing out, unable to suppress the smile on my lips. My aunt waved her hand repeatedly.
You two really are.
My uncle placed a piece of meat in my bowl, grinning widely.
Weren't you the same when you were a young girl?
This also made me feel a bit emotional. In my past life, I also had such beautiful times, but unfortunately, those feelings did not last long. I busied myself with gathering news related to Wei Liang, feeling a bit anxious in my heart. Are those pirates fierce? The maid shook her head.
Although they have run rampant on the waters for a long time, they are no match for the government troops. It is estimated they will be completely wiped out in less than half a month.
I slowly let out a breath at this moment and instructed her that any letters from Wei Liang or news related to him must be reported to me immediately.
There is one thing that might be somewhat related.
The maid said with some hesitation.
The commander for this rebellion suppression has been replaced.
I leaned closer. I recalled that the one previously decided upon was young Master Wei's uncle. Who was it changed to?
Commander Xie.
Fearing I might not remember him, she explained quietly.
It is that very person, the Commander Xie Yi, who recently broke off the engagement with our Shu family.
Commander Xie Yi. I was instantly dumbfounded. In my past life, he definitely never made this trip. Fear gripped my mind. And most untimely, I recalled the moment of his death, recalling most inopportunely how, at the moment of his death, his palm had gripped my clothes so tightly that even after his flesh grew cold, he did not let go at all. Imprisoned in that devil's den for 5 years, it was only when he drew his last breath that he pretended to joke, spitting out a mouthful of blood.
I guess I finally acted like a decent human being for once. Don't hold a grudge against me anymore in the future. If there is a next life, don't resent me anymore in the future. If there is a next life, I would rather not seek revenge on her and let you go as well. Do you believe it?
I have been reborn. But what about him? Has he also met with the next life? Xie Yi said he would let me go, but his nonsense could never be trusted. I also knew an ironclad rule. Wei Liang is the man I love, and his uncle is also connected to me. Wei Liang is the man I love, and his uncle is also connected to me. If things went wrong, Xie Yi's expedition this time might be the consequence of rebirth, and absolutely not just to look for me. Half a month later, Wei Liang has achieved military merits. He also comes from a highly influential background, and will soon be able to return to the capital as an official, thanks to his family's legacy. A young talent of the highest caliber, young and promising. I originally wanted to stay in Yangzhou for a few more days, but a secret letter from the capital said that my eldest brother was ill. In my past life, his constitution was extremely robust, and there was absolutely no such occurrence. Anxious and worried, I hurriedly packed my bags, planning to return home. The moment I stepped out of the main gate, I encountered an extremely grand carriage. The soldiers ordered everyone to clear the way.
Please lead the way, Commander Xie.
Xie Yi. I clutched the edge of the carriage curtain, my soul seemingly about to leap out of my throat. That voice was hoarse and deep, yet still indolent.
Let them withdraw first.
I didn't hear who nearby said a word, and there was a brief silence outside. A few seconds later, my maid ran back to report.
The commander says it has been very unsettled lately, and hopes the young lady will travel with him.
My fingers curled slightly. No need. I have hired enough guards, so there is no need to trouble him. I had rarely felt such a cold emotion. The maid was a little surprised, but she gritted her teeth and went down to deliver the message. The wheels rolled out of the city gates, There was always a squad of soldiers tailing closely behind, neither too far nor too near. The Xie family's coachman said righteously,
What a coincidence. The commander is also returning to the capital to report, so we happen to be traveling the same way.
Anxious about my eldest brother, I rushed day and night without stopping. After several days of exhausting travel, changing horses at several inns, I was finally slumped in the carriage at the end, my eyelids fighting to stay open. My head bumped against the wooden panels several times, leaving purple bruises, even failing to notice that the palanquin had been forced to a halt. While the clamor outside continued, the wooden door of the carriage was lifted. The fading light of the setting sun spilled into the carriage. Covered in dust and the chill of the approaching night, Xie Yi stepped inside. With one hand, he pulled me into his arms and carried me out. That striking face in the darkness of the night merged with the memories of my past life. That deep, bone-deep hatred instantly rushed to my head. I struggled with all my might, vowing to break free from him, determined never to look back. My sleepiness vanished completely. I thrashed around, reaching to pull the sharpest gold hairpin from my hair.
I didn't mean to do anything to you.
He locked me in place with one arm and freed his other hand to snatch away my weapon.
Traveling day and night like this, even fighting a war is hardly this intense. Your body won't hold up.
I raised my arm as high as I could and slapped him hard across the face. None of this is any of your business. Having come to this point, I was absolutely certain that Xie Yi had also been reborn. With the clear mark of my fingers on his left cheek, he clenched his jaw and did not utter a single word. He carried me forward even faster. I writhed violently, but he held me down firmly, walking straight into an inn.
Get us some rooms, the two most expensive rooms upstairs.
The innkeeper was stunned for a moment. He threw his outer coat down, covering my head completely.
My wife is still young, and she has a terrible temper. She just likes to throw tantrums with me.
Once I was tossed onto the soft daybed, I rolled over immediately, grabbed whatever objects were nearby, and threw them all at his head. My brother's misfortune. Was it your doing? I was trembling with rage as I drew his sword. How could there be such a perfect coincidence? You deliberately forced me to return to the capital. The blade brushed against Xie Yi's throat, cutting a red mark into his skin. He turned his head slightly and looked at me.
It was indeed a scheme by a hidden hand, but it wasn't me. It was your sister-in-law. She knew the one I wanted to marry was you. When I tried everything to go south to find you, she lost her mind. She claimed she could elope with me just the same.
Xie Yi paused.
I did not agree. And I only found out a few days ago that she actually dared to poison your brother. A widow remarrying always sounds better than the reputation of an affair.
I was utterly stunned. In our past life, my sister-in-law had walked on eggshells, unwilling to give up her wealth and status. She had endured decades with Xie Yi, and everyone praised her gentle and virtuous nature, noting she would never even bicker with others. I never expected that once Xie Yi cast her aside, she would actually go so madly heartless. I deeply regretted not warning my brother more, and not planning to have her killed sooner. I bit my lip, my arm trembling violently, unable to hold the sword steady.
I have sent people to fetch rare medicine from the treasury and ask the finest imperial physicians to treat him. He will certainly be fine. Please set your mind at ease.
Xie Yi's voice was incredibly deep. He was returning to the capital after achieving military merit. Our traveling together along the way was already known to the magistrates of every prefecture and had been recorded in official intelligence reports. I could not kill him. Clenching my teeth, I threw down the sword and said fiercely, "This trouble started because of you. So this is your debt to pay." Xie Yi bent down to pick up the sword. He let out a heavy sigh.
Yes, it is my brother. It is I who should pay for this. At any rate, he is doing very well now. You can rest easy.
With those words, he looked at me, then broke through the door and left.
Sleep well.
I was utterly exhausted. I did not sleep for long, partly because I wanted to avoid Xie Yi. Before dawn on the third night, I whipped my horse and departed in haste. Fortunately, along the way, he did not pester me again. I arrived safely at the inner residence. 5 days later, the household was in utter chaos. My sister-in-law was powerless to take charge. She collapsed limply onto the grass, her dark hair disheveled, washing her face with tears, looking wretched to the extreme. When Xie Yi abandoned her, she immediately regretted it bitterly. But my brother's feelings toward her had ultimately turned to absolute despair. He refused to see her for several days. When she had a lover on her mind, he could still cover for her. Yet, for the sake of an outsider, she had tried to take his life. No matter what, he would no longer humoring her. I was in his study, watching his pale, grim face, but he still had the strength to read the files, and I quietly breathed a sigh of relief. I wanted to drag her to the authorities, but my brother paused his brush, letting a drop of pitch-black ink fall. His voice was faintly dry and raspy.
Then she will surely die.
Looking at his former love, his heart softened once more. I lowered my head, my nose stinging with sorrow, as tears fell one by one to the floor. If she doesn't die, then I am the one who should die. Do you remember the oath you once made to our mother? I was young back then, and I have long since forgotten it all. Later, when I grew a bit older, my wet nurse told me I must filial to my elder brother.
Because the young master was extremely good to you. When you were mischievous as a child and fell into the lake, the young master was also just a young boy. He was still coughing up blood at the time, yet he jumped into the water to save you. Before our mother drew her last breath, he said that no matter what, he would surely take good care of his little sister.
My brother dazed for a moment, then raised his arm to wipe away my tears. I spoke of my past life. She was consumed by jealousy and poisoned me to death. But in truth, it was not so. On the night Xie Yi drew his last breath, I followed him into reincarnation. But now, I have used every means possible to force him to sever ties and abandon that woman. In his past life, he did not have an easy life either. Perhaps he simply had no energy left to settle scores with his wife's infidelity. And as for me, out of a moment of anger, I had even harbored the selfish thought of ignoring him. My tears fell even faster. My brother set down his brush and looked toward the horizon, remaining in dead silence for a long time. The girl who used to brew ginseng soup for him and pick up the broken-legged sparrow from under the tree was now completely ruined in appearance, never to return. He said,
Very well.
On the day my sister-in-law died, my brother locked himself in his room. For an entire day, he did not eat a single grain of rice. Her end was extremely miserable. The death row cell was cold and damp, and no food was delivered to her. She cursed Xie Yi and cursed me, but what hurt the most was that she had backstabbed my brother. She originally had a husband who doted on her, and a luxurious, comfortable life. Yet she was greedy for everything, until in the end, everything was completely ruined. I visited her in prison once. She was in utter despair, her face like withered wood, looking as if she had aged more than a decade. Only when she looked at me did a glimmer of hope appear in her dull eyes.
Did Master Xu send you?
Holding back her tears, she held out a blood-stained scrap of cloth.
This is my final letter before my execution. I no longer have the strength to excuse myself, but I only pray he lives a long life and achieves all his desires.
I hesitated for a moment. He would. That scrap of cloth was extremely damp. When I set it on fire, thick black smoke billowed up. There is no need for you to worry about him. After her execution, a downpour fell over the entire city. When the heavy rain stopped, water droplets were still dripping. Xie Yi came to our manor. His former love had died a miserable death, yet he did not seem to care at all.
In this lifetime, I had never interfered in her case, nor had I ever saved her life.
When he spoke, his words carried a hint of caution, and even a barely perceptible plea. Commander Xie has slain countless enemies, and is known far and wide for his ferocity. But at this moment, he merely kept his head bowed, his eyes rimmed with red, as if a mist had risen within them.
My solemn oath. Are you willing to hear it now?
I did not look at him. No. Dejected, he lowered his eyes, and pulled the corner of his mouth into a faint smile. Sigh.
In our past life, I was truly a bastard, but in this life, I mistook your cousin for you, which is why I treated her so well and showered her with everything. You must have realized it too. I have truly changed. It was just that before. I didn't know. I didn't know that the white moonlight of my heart had long since become you.
He was filled with immense regret, his eyes bloodshot, his voice dry and raspy, on the verge of tears.
Since my reincarnation, I too have had sleepless nights, filled with bitter regret. I only wish to build a good relationship with you and create a beautiful story together. Yet you insist on holding a grudge because of her.
Recalling my extremely miserable past life, I gritted my teeth. When you were taking your revenge on her, did you ever consider that I was innocent? Xie Yi fell silent for a moment. The words he would say next were bound to be highly unpleasant as well. Hearing up to this point, I ordered the servants to show the guest out. Lately, my elder brother had been off duty, and I had not had the time to manage the accounts, which had made the servants lazy and undisciplined. They dared to let any kind of swine inside. Xie Yi stared at me for a long time, as if trying to engrave my image into his bones. His throat moved slightly, and he only said,
Then I shall leave.
He seemed to still have some lingering affection, forcing a wide smile that carried a touch of bitterness, as if deceiving himself.
The future is still long. There is no need to rush right now.
I began to take charge of the inner household and audited the bad debts of dozens of shops. Xie Yi haunted me like a persistent ghost. He either sent people to offer financial favors, or sent extremely thick, long letters expressing his feelings. The servants gradually rejected them on my behalf, but when they came before me, it was still very painful.
Commander Xie adamantly refused to take them back.
I glanced at them for a moment, then just throw them to the beggars. During this period of time, Wei Liang also returned to the city. The young master, dressed in his bright red court robes, making his eyebrows look as black as lacquer, and his face as smooth as jade. His steps were stiff, as if trying to look solemn and stern, wanting to hide his past playboy wildness. As I stared at him, and he couldn't help but smile, he covered the corner of his mouth with his hand.
Is it very weird?
No, you look very handsome. Officer Wei. With this shout, he almost tripped and fell face first into the dirt.
You just love to tease me.
I followed by his side, circling from his left to his right, then threw myself into his arms. Then you can tease me back too. Wei Liang bit his lip.
How would I dare?
In the past, your mother forced you to call me second sister Shu. Why didn't you? He held my hand tightly and pulled me closer to his chest. Our eyes met. The boy's voice was clear and bright, and at this moment, extremely soft and tender.
Sister Shu.
In mid-June, there was a very beautiful day. Wei Liang came to propose marriage. My eldest brother has retired due to illness. Looking at the pomegranate blossoms blooming in the courtyard, the days felt just right. Much of the resentment in my heart had dissipated. He kept him to play chess and chat in detail. After seeing Wei Liang off, my eldest brother stood in the pavilion and said to me,
I have already investigated thoroughly. The Wei family has a strict and upright reputation, and he is also a good man. Yunkao, may you find happiness in this life.
My nose grew sour. I buried my face and gave a soft reply. You too. He beamed with joy for a moment. With this marriage alliance finalized, the whole family was overjoyed, leaving only Xie Yi extremely displeased.
He is young and inexperienced, with no military achievements, possessing nothing but a face that attracts trouble. How can you be so sure that he can absolutely make you happy?
He blocked my path, the tyrant leaping down from his saddle. His cheeks were deathly pale, making him look even more malevolent, with none of his former composure. Then what about you? I swept a cool glance over him, my voice completely flat. Wherein lies your merit? Xie Yi kept his eyes locked on me and actually said it out loud.
My rank is higher than his, and I have a reputation that awes the world. I am invincible in battle, and I will give all my savings to you, to spend as you please. In what way can I not beat him?
I said, Commander Xie, those are indeed beautiful words. Then half a month later, when war breaks out in the north, you will request to lead the army. This was a scheme to force his hand, simply to send him away, with utter disregard for whether he lived or died. In my past life, a majestic commander was buried in this very bloody battle. At that time, the entire land wept, and the whole city was clad in white. The loss of such a god-like figure was far more tragic and painful than if Xie Yi had died. He raised his eyebrows and curled the corner of his mouth slightly.
You wish for my death?
I will certainly not shrink from it, sacrificing my life to avenge the country's enemies. Does this count as a dignified death?
Yes, you are so good to me. I'm afraid it might make Wei Liang jealous.
I refused to take his bait. I turned around and left immediately. The wind was blowing wildly, scattering my hair. He stood frozen in place, not moving an inch. After a long time, a devastatingly sorrowful reply came from behind me.
If you are willing to forgive me for this, then I will go.
But I did not expect that when Xie Yi accepted the imperial decree to lead the army, he would also specifically name Wei Liang. He forced Wei Liang to serve as his deputy. It is fine if I die. But as for him,
if he turns out to be a coward, how could he ever deserve you?
Wei Liang accepted the command without hesitation. The wind whipped his sash, making a loud rustling sound. His gaze was as sharp as an arrow. After a moment, he turned his head to me and said,
I am far superior to Xie Yi. He has known this for a long time, but his arrogance refused to let him believe it. This time, I will surely return victorious.
I believed in Wei Liang completely, even though my heart was filled with anxiety. As a general, it was his duty to slay the enemies of our country. I bid him farewell, urging him to hold out until late autumn. The northern border would be freezing cold, so I would write to him regularly and help prepare warm, padded clothes for him. The battle flags fluttered in the wind. Mounted on his warhorse, Wei Liang leaned down to look at me, his eyes filled with endless tenderness.
Wait for me, Sister Shu.
I lowered my head and smiled secretly, giving him my promise. The commander-in-chief gripped his reins tightly, glaring at him fiercely for a long moment, as if consumed by a deadly rage, exerting every ounce of his strength until the veins on his knuckles bulged. Over the next few months, Wei Liang and I exchanged dozens of letters. He wrote that everything was going well on the front lines, except that the commander-in-chief found him disagreeable and tried to marginalize him at every turn. Fortunately, there were clear-sighted officers from other factions who helped him defuse countless hidden plots. Reports of victories kept coming in. My eldest brother, now a trusted confidant of the emperor, always learned of the military updates early and rushed home to tell me.
My future brother-in-law is indeed an absolute genius. His Majesty also holds him in extremely high regard. He will surely be granted a noble title upon his return to the capital.
I was finally able to sleep peacefully. But one morning, right after the imperial court adjourned, my brother rushed back home. His face was completely pale, as if he had lost his soul. My heart leaped into my throat, and I didn't even know if I dared to ask. He quickly explained,
Don't be afraid. This is a resounding victory. Your future husband will return home safe and sound very soon.
Then, he pulled half of a still shining hairpin from his robe.
Xie Yi, is dead. Only this item was brought back.
That was from a very long time ago, on his journey back. The very one he had snatched from my palm. But since I had so much jewelry, and my mind had been filled with doubts back then, I had long forgotten all about it. Only then did I suddenly realize that Xie Yi could have survived. In the final battle, the piece of jewelry on his chest fell to the ground. He turned back to retrieve it, only to be ambushed by assassins. He was stabbed several times. Before taking his last breath, he entrusted the gold hairpin to his most trusted brother, coughing up pools of dark blood, but he still held on with all his might, refusing to close his eyes until he heard the oath.
Her keepsake must be returned safely to her estate.
On the very night before this happened, the camp had briefly celebrated Wei Liang's birthday. In this gloomy environment, there was finally a happy occasion. A soldier then probed him.
Once Commander Wei returns to court, what do you want to do?
He chuckled softly.
To marry my moonlight.
Every single word struck deep into Xie Yi's mind. For a long time, I did not raise my arm to take it. My older brother turned the hairpin over and over, looking at it for a long while.
It is still as clean as new. Do you really not want it anymore?
I said indifferently, yes, melt it down and give it away. The day Wei Liang triumphed coincided with the return of spring. The spring breeze is like an old friend. As soon as it arrives, life flourishes, melting thousands of feet of ice and leaving behind endless forests. I went to the city gates to welcome him. The young commander dismounted and held me in a tight embrace. His heart was beating wildly, and he let out a joyful cry.
I have returned in triumph.
Behind him lay distant mountains and rivers, while love was right by his side. Those broken memories of love and hate, all dispersed like smoke and clouds. I raised my head, gazed into his clear, bright eyes, and smiled in response. You have returned in triumph. The broken mirror is made whole again. I still have countless words that I need to tell him that our wedding was organized by my older brother, who was not skilled at such tasks, getting flustered and causing countless mishaps. To tell him that the pomegranates in the courtyard once bloomed red, and the fallen leaves once decayed. But now, the lotus flowers I planted myself are in full bloom. With spring's arrival, people are as beautiful as jade, and tomorrow, the flowers will still be in bloom.